Hello, and welcome to week 7 of high school mythology. So, today we're going to focus on the Aeneid and the story of Aeneas. So, I'm going to go ahead and pull up our slides and get started. So, in the story of Aeneas, we find out what takes place after the conclusion of the Iliad. And Virgil is the writer of the Aeneid, and it opens with, I sing of arms and the man. So the focus here is on arms, not meaning like these kind of arms, of course, but armor, right? And that kind of ties into that Roman value placed on war and country. Arms and the man. And for this purpose, Aeneas is the man being referred to. So Aeneas was a Trojan prince. We had mention of him in the Iliad, and he is the sole survivor from Troy after the Greeks defeat the Trojans. He's the son of the mortal Anchises and goddess Venus. Of course, she was referred to as Aphrodite in the Iliad, being that was written by Homer, a Greek, and in the Aeneid, she'll be referred to as Venus because this is a Roman writer, Virgil. Aeneas is the founder of Rome. Now, you may have also heard the origin story of Rome, that it was founded by the twins, or one of them, right? Romulus and Remus. However, the Romans decided that they want to have a noble origin story too, in a similar fashion to the Greeks. Another purpose that Virgil had for writing this is to define Roman pietas, which we'll talk a little bit more about when we get to the second slide. We'll talk about what pietas is. So Virgil lived from about 70 BCE to about 19 BCE. And he wrote the Aeneid from about 30 BCE till his death in 19 BCE. And it was actually not finished when he died. As he was writing it, it was being read aloud to Emperor Augustus. And because Virgil rather, he had a dying wish, right? His last wish that the manuscript be burned. However, Emperor Augustus ordered that it be published anyway. And if an emperor ordered something, well, then that's just the way it was going to be. So, as we mentioned, Virgil did write the Aeneid, both to continue the story that was begun in the Iliad and to also kind of compete with Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, because the Greeks had these noble, heroic epics. The Romans wanted to be able to do the same. As we mentioned, it's a foundation myth of Rome, this idea that Aeneas is the founder of Rome. It was written after Augustus had taken over Rome and had ushered in what was known as the Pax Augusta, or the Pax Romana, which was a Roman time of peace. Virgil calls Aeneas a man distinguished for pietas. So pietas is where we get our word propriety. So what did it mean for the Romans to be proper? What did they see as the values or traits of an ideal Roman citizen? First of all, respect for the past. Secondly, concern for the future. Third, respect for the gods. And then fourth, respect for the institution of marriage. So something that Virgil does in the text itself to indicate how Aeneas is indeed an example of pietas. Look at this order that we see right here in the middle of our slide. So respect for the past. So once Troy falls and Aeneas is escaping, he does certain things, and he does these things in a certain order, which reflect this idea of pietas. He grabs up his father and carries his father on his back. Respect for the past, right? Taking his father, taking the past with him. The second is concern for the future. So the second thing that Aeneas does is to take the hand of his son, Aeolus. Therefore, concern for the future. The third thing he does is to grab up in his other hand the household gods. We've mentioned before that Romans have these individualized household gods. Okay, so that is literally what Aeneas grabs up third, right? These household gods. Then there's respect for the institution of marriage. That comes at number 4. And his wife, Creusa, he tells her to follow along behind him. So you see, he does not have that physical connection to her like he does with his father, with his son, and with the household gods to make sure they're safe. So what happens is Creusa is lost. Now later on, as convenience would happen, Aeneas comes along, the ghost of Creusa, who tells him, oh, everything is fine. You go on and you found Rome, as you're prophesied to do. So this does show these values in order of the Roman ideal citizen, and shows, of course, how Aeneas reflects these. Another example of contrast, too, that we see between Greek and Roman is a contrast between Aeneas and Odysseus. Aeneas is an example of a straight arrow archetype. He follows certain rules, certain standards, whereas we see Odysseus being more of a trickster archetype, right? He plays these tricks in order to be successful, whereas Aeneas is more straightforward. So they're the antithesis or the opposite of each other. So as we mentioned, the goals that Virgil had in mind when he wrote the Aeneid was, first of all, to give Rome a noble origin, like we mentioned, define Roman virtue or pietas, to encourage those in Rome to be Roman citizens. That would mean following, of course, these ideals, and then to attempt to appease these feelings of guilt in the constant battle that continued to take place between Carthage and Rome. So we kind of make sure to blame everything on Dido, so that it kind of lets Aeneas or Rome off the hook there. So then we have several prophecies too that take place in the Aeneid. We do, in addition to having the ghost of Creusa, Hector, who we remember from the Iliad as the bravest of the Trojan warriors. Of course, Achilles kills Hector, and then Hector appears to Aeneas in a dream and tells him to leave Troy. Secondly, as we talked about, Creusa's ghost comes to Aeneas and tells him that he's going to found a city in Italy, which of course will be Rome. You also have a prophecy as Aeneas is on his journey, and there are connections too to this idea of the hero's journey again. But one of the Harpies makes a prophecy that the Trojans will reach the point of starvation and will eat their own tables, which in essence is actually this flat bread, right? You also have Jupiter disclosing to Venus that Aeneas is going to fight a war in Italy and destroy his enemies. And Dido condemns Rome and Carthage to everlasting opposition when Aeneas leaves her. So we mentioned that along the way, Aeneas does encounter Dido. He stays with her for a time. She is very much in love with him. And then when he leaves, she takes her own life. So that is also another example of a myth being used to explain why certain events take place, why things are the way that they are. This is supposed to explain why Rome and Carthage are constantly in opposition with each other. So those are the main points there that we see as far as prophecies go. And this is just kind of a timeline here of what we see taking place during the Aeneid. Aeneas, of course, flees Troy. They stop at Delos to make sacrifices to Apollo. He gets the vision from the gods when he's in Crete. We've mentioned the harpies and the prophecy that they're given there about eating their own tables. In Carthage, his encounters with Queen Dido and how that results in this eternal opposition between Rome and Carthage. In Sicily, Anchises, his father, dies. Funeral games are held. He gets into a contact with the Sibyl. He goes to Latium. There's war again, and eventually victory, right? In which he is able to successfully defeat his enemies and indeed found Rome. So be sure you check on the classroom page for questions so that we can further our discussion in the comments and reply section. And also be sure to look for the artwork or poem that will be posted too. Look forward to hearing your thoughts. Bye.